In a world of cold technology and hard surfaces, the human heart remains the only thing that is truly real. Experience the collision of digital art and raw emotion in our unique storytelling experience. Subscribe now and feel the beat of a heart that refuses to break.
The first thing I noticed when I got to that cell was the smell. Not what you'd expect. Not the usual damp concrete or disinfectant they splash on the floors every other Tuesday. It was something underneath all that. Something older. The smell of men who had stopped hoping. I recognized it because somewhere around the third week, I started to smell like them too. I used to run 3 companies. 41 years I spent building something real. A logistics firm that moved goods across 7 states. A small construction outfit I started with 2 trucks and a prayer, and a property management company my wife Helen helped me grow before the cancer took her. Between the 3 of them, I employed over 200 people at peak. I signed paychecks, I made decisions, I shook hands with mayors and senators and men who would later appear in the evening news. None of that mattered when the bailiff put his hand on my shoulder and told me to stand. My name is Arthur. I am 68 years old, and for 14 months I sat in the county correctional facility in northern Georgia for something I did not do, framed by my own son and the woman he chose over everything his mother and I had ever built. I want to tell you what happened. Not the version my son gave to the press. Not the version that ran in the local paper with my mugshot above the fold. The real version. The one that begins long before the courtroom and ends somewhere my son never saw coming. My son Marcus was 34 when he married Serena. I remember the first time he brought her home. Helen had been gone 2 years by then, and the house felt different without her. Too quiet in the mornings. Too large in the evenings. Marcus walked through the front door with Serena on his arm, and something in his posture had already changed. He was standing differently. Straighter, but not in a confident way. In a way that told me he was performing. Serena was beautiful in the way that certain things are beautiful when they want something. She smiled at everything I said that first dinner. She asked me questions about the business. Smart questions, specific questions, and I remember thinking this was a woman who had done her research. At the time, I thought that was a compliment. She called me Mr. Hale, even after I asked her 3 times to call me Arthur. Within 6 months of the wedding, Marcus had moved his office into the main building of my logistics firm. He said he wanted to learn the business from the ground up. I was glad. I had been thinking about succession for years. I handed him responsibility carefully, the way you hand someone a tool that can either build something or take a finger off. What I did not see, what I was too proud or too hopeful to see, was that the hand reaching for the tool was not my son's alone. Serena began attending board meetings. Then she began sitting beside Marcus at the head of the table. Then she began answering questions I had directed at my operations manager, a man named Frank who had been with me for 19 years. Frank came to me one afternoon and shut my office door behind him. He sat down across from me and folded his hands the way a man does when he is about to say something he has rehearsed. He said, "Arthur, I think you should pay attention to what's happening in here." I thanked him. I said I would. I went home that night and told myself Frank was getting older and probably feeling displaced. I was a fool. The change happened faster after that. Small things first. Purchase orders rerouted through a vendor I didn't recognize. A line item in the construction company's budget that Frank flagged and then, 2 weeks later, disappeared entirely. A meeting with my property attorney that Marcus canceled on my behalf. Told the man I'd had a minor health event and would reschedule. I hadn't had any health event. I hadn't even known there was a meeting. When I confronted Marcus, Serena was in the room. That, I would later understand, was never an accident. She sat in the corner chair and said nothing. She let Marcus do the talking. He told me I was stressed. He told me I had been overworking since Mom passed and he was worried about me. He told me I'd forgotten about the meeting myself, that he hadn't canceled anything, just rescheduled it because I'd told him to. His voice was so steady, his eyes were soft in exactly the way you'd expect from a concerned son. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. That was my first mistake, and it would cost me everything for the next 2 years. The accusation came on a Tuesday. I remember because I was supposed to have lunch with my granddaughter Lily, Marcus's daughter from a brief relationship before Serena. Lily was 7 at the time. She liked grilled cheese and lemonade, and had recently decided she wanted to be a marine biologist. I had already looked up the best marine biology programs in the state, because that is the kind of grandfather I was. My phone rang at 9:47 in the morning. It was a detective from the county sheriff's department. He asked me to come in voluntarily for a conversation. He used that word, conversation. He said it in the tone people use when they have already decided what the conversation is going to conclude. I went in voluntarily because I had nothing to hide. The allegation was financial fraud, grand theft by deception. They claimed I had forged documentation to liquidate a trust fund that Marcus and Serena had established for Lily's education, nearly $280,000, according to the paperwork they slid across the table. They claimed I had transferred the funds to a personal account under a variant of my name and then systematically moved the money through 3 different institutions. I sat in that interrogation room and listened to a detective explain my alleged crimes to me with the patience of a man who had done this 100 times. And I felt something I cannot fully describe even now. It was not fear. It was a kind of cold recognition, like seeing a house you built, burning and understanding, for the first time, that someone had been inside with a match. The paperwork had my signature. I knew immediately it wasn't mine. The loops in my R were wrong. The way I crossed my T's was slightly off. But I also knew, in that same cold moment, that anyone looking at it would see what they expected to see. I called my attorney. Marcus and Serena had already retained a firm in Atlanta. One of those firms with 4 last names on the letterhead and offices on the 42nd floor. My attorney was a good man. A local man. He told me the documentation was sophisticated and that it would take time to prove forgery. He told me the account was real, existed under my name, had my social security number attached to it, and had been opened with a Georgia driver's license I had apparently never reported missing. Time. That was the thing he kept saying we needed. They set bail at $350,000. I had assets. I had more than enough. But every account I tried to access had been frozen pending investigation. The construction company had gone quiet. No new contracts, existing ones reassigned. The property management company had been placed under a temporary receivership that Marcus had apparently petitioned for on the grounds that I was incapacitated. Incapacitated. A word Serena had suggested to him, I would later find out. My attorney did what he could. It was not enough to keep me out of a cell. I went in, wearing a gray suit. A guard told me to remove my watch. It was the watch Helen gave me on our 30th anniversary. Silver case, simple face, inscription on the back that read, "Steady as you go." I held it in my hand for a moment longer than I should have, and the guard, a younger man, looked away. I do not know why that small mercy affected me as much as it did, but I stood in that processing room and I made myself a quiet promise. I said it to Helen, really, the way I have always talked to her since she left. I said, I will be steady, and I will be ready when the time comes. 14 months is a strange amount of time. Long enough that the seasons change twice. Long enough that your body adjusts and begins to accept what your mind refuses to. Long enough that you stop dreaming about the life you had and start dreaming about smaller things. A specific breakfast, the sound of a particular road, the weight of your own keys in your own pocket. Marcus came to see me 3 times in the first 4 months. Each time I refused the visit. Not out of anger, though there was plenty of that. I refused because I understood something very early. He was coming to see the damage. He was coming the way people slow down to look at an accident on the highway. He needed to confirm that I was broken. I would not give him that. Instead, I worked, not physically. Though I did what I could in that place, walking the perimeter every morning, doing push-ups in my cell until my arms gave out. I worked in a different way. I had a yellow legal pad and I filled it, page by page, with everything I could remember. Dates, names, conversations, the specific wording of emails I had seen, the vendor name on those rerouted purchase orders, the name of the attorney meeting Marcus had canceled. Every detail I could pull from memory, I wrote down in small, careful handwriting, and I organized it the way I would organize a logistics route. By sequence, by dependency, by what would break first if pressure was applied. I also had a visitor who was not my son. Frank came. Every 3 weeks, without fail, Frank drove 40 minutes to sit across from me at a laminate table while a guard stood 6 feet away. He brought nothing. You are not allowed to bring much. But he came with information folded up in his memory, the way you fold a document you're afraid to lose. He told me about the vendor, a shell company registered in Delaware that had been receiving payments from my logistics firm for 14 months before I went in. He told me the company had 2 directors listed. One was a man I didn't recognize, and one was Serena's maiden name. He told me Frank had found this because Frank had spent 30 years in operations and had a nose for things that didn't add up on a spreadsheet. He told me he had not gone to the authorities because he wasn't sure who to trust, but he had kept records. He had kept very careful records. What kind of records? I asked him. He looked at me across that laminate table and said, the kind that would interest a federal investigator. I told him to wait. I told him the timing mattered more than the evidence alone. He nodded. He understood. Frank has always understood the difference between having the right tool and knowing when to swing it. I had a second visitor around the 8th month. A woman named Patricia Odom, a forensic accountant, referred to me through my attorney. She spent 3 sessions with me, each one an hour, each one conducted through the glass of the visitation room with the phone pressed to our ears. She was methodical in a way that reminded me of Helen, actually. She listened more than she spoke. She asked questions and then wrote things down and then asked the same questions differently to see if my answers changed. They didn't change. They couldn't because they were true. By the end of our 3rd session, Patricia had a map. She called it a map, literally, a document she described to me in careful terms, a web of transactions, redirected funds, altered authorization signatures, and an insurance claim on Lily's trust that had been filed and paid out to an account that had been quietly renamed after Marcus and Serena's wedding. The money had never gone to Lily. It had never gone to me either. Patricia filed a report with the FBI Financial Crimes Division in the 11th month. I know the timing of this only because Frank told me afterward. At the time, sitting in that cell, I knew nothing except that the days were moving and something was moving with them, and I was waiting. What I felt during those 14 months was not quite anger. Anger is hot, and what I carried was cold. It was a specific, patient cold, the kind that does not go away but also does not overwhelm you. It keeps you functional. It keeps you thinking. Every time the cold started to slip into something darker, something closer to despair, I would take out the legal pad and I would write another detail I remembered, and the act of writing steadied me. Steady as you go. The morning I was released, it was raining, not dramatic, storm of the century rain. Just a flat, gray Georgia drizzle that made the parking lot shine under the facility lights. I walked out through those doors in the same gray suit I had walked in wearing, pressed by the facility laundry, which had done its best, and my attorney met me at the curb with an umbrella he held mostly over me. He handed me my watch. The guard had logged it with my personal property. I put it on standing in the rain. I did not look at the inscription. I didn't need to. My attorney told me there were people waiting. I said I knew. He told me I didn't have to engage with any of it today, that we could go directly to his office, that there was no obligation. I told him I had been waiting 14 months, and I was not going to wait 1 more hour. He drove me to a hotel downtown, a Marriott, clean and anonymous, which was where my team had set up. When I say my team, I mean Frank, who was already there with 3 banker's boxes of documentation, Patricia Odom, who had flown in from her office in Charlotte, a civil litigation attorney named Deborah Cross, who specialized in financial fraud recovery and had agreed to take my case on a contingency basis after Patricia's report crossed her desk, and a federal prosecutor, a quiet man named Agent Tillman, who shook my hand and told me there had been a sealed indictment sitting in a federal court for 11 days. 11 days. It had been ready and waiting while I walked out those prison doors. I sat down at the conference table they had arranged, and I looked at the faces around me, and I understood, for the first time since the detective had called me on a Tuesday morning, that the ground was finally solid under my feet again. Tillman explained what was going to happen. Federal agents had executed a search warrant on the logistics firm's offices at 6 that morning, 2 hours before I had walked out of the facility. They had seized servers, files, and physical records. A second warrant had been executed on the property management accounts. Marcus's personal attorney had been served with a civil subpoena 20 minutes ago. Serena, Tillman told me, had attempted to transfer assets to an account in her sister's name at 7:48 that morning. The transfer had been flagged and frozen. She had not yet been told. I asked about Lily. Tillman said the trust funds, including interest, were being placed in a protected account under court supervision pending resolution of the case. Lily would not lose anything. I sat with that for a moment. 7 years old, wanting to study marine biology. None of this was her fault. None of it was even about her, really. She had just been the instrument. That is what bothered me most, if I am being honest, not the money. Not the 14 months. The fact that a child had been used as a prop in her own father's scheme. At 9:15 that morning, Marcus arrived at the logistics firm's main office to find it occupied by federal agents. Frank had arranged for a contact to let me know when Marcus's car pulled into the lot. My phone buzzed once. That was the signal, I am told. I was not there. I want to be clear about that. I was sitting in a hotel conference room. I am told that Marcus stood in the parking lot for a long time, that he made several phone calls, that by the third call he understood that none of the accounts were accessible, that Serena was not answering her phone, that his Atlanta attorney, when reached, told him in measured terms that the situation had changed significantly overnight and that they needed to meet immediately. I am told he sat on a parking barrier outside my own building and put his face in his hands. I do not tell you that with satisfaction. I want to be clear about that too. What I felt in that hotel room, sitting with my watch on my wrist and rain still streaking the windows, was not triumphant. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of a long overdue accounting finally being settled. The ledger balance, not because I had won something, but because the truth had finally caught up with the version of events my son had constructed, and the truth was heavier. Marcus was indicted on 9 federal counts 3 months later. Serena faced 11, including the additional charge related to the fraudulent insurance claim on Lily's trust. Their Atlanta attorneys entered negotiations almost immediately. There was no trial. There rarely is when the documentation is as complete as what Frank and Patricia had assembled. I am not going to tell you the settlement terms. Some of that is under confidentiality agreement, and some of it I simply do not want to revisit. What I will tell you is that my companies were returned to me, what remained of them. The logistics firm had lost 2 major contracts while I was inside, and it took nearly 8 months of work to rebuild those relationships. The construction outfit needed new management and a thorough audit. The property management company was in the best shape of the 3 because the receivership manager, as it turned out, had been quietly competent. Frank retired the following spring. I gave a small speech at his retirement dinner that I will not repeat here because I cried during it, and that is between me and the 22 people who were in that room. Lily came to live with her maternal grandmother during the proceedings. She is 9 now. She still wants to study marine biology. I take her to the Georgia Aquarium sometimes on weekends and let her explain to me, at significant length and with great seriousness, the ecological significance of various sea creatures. She is, without question, the finest person I have ever met. I do not see Marcus. I do not know if I will again. I have thought about this carefully, the way I think about complicated routing problems, mapping every possible path and outcome. Every path I find that includes Marcus in my future requires him to be someone he has shown me he is not. Maybe he will become that person. I am not in the business of forecasting things I cannot verify. What I know is this. I spent 41 years building something real. I spent 14 months in a cell, and I walked out of that cell with the same thing I walked in with, a clear understanding of who I am and what I stand for. Serena and Marcus tried to take my companies, my reputation, my freedom, but the one thing they could not take, the one thing that was never in the paperwork they forged or the accounts they drained, was that. There is a man in that facility. I think about him sometimes. He was in the cell next to mine for 4 months. We never spoke much. He was a quiet man, younger than me by about 20 years, with tired eyes and good manners. One evening, I heard him ask the guard what time it was, and the guard told him, and the man said, "Thank you," the way people say thank you when they genuinely mean it. When almost everything has been taken from you, small courtesies become significant. I said to him once through the wall that I believed things eventually balanced out. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said he hoped I was right. I hope I was right for him too. I wear my watch every day. The inscription is worn slightly at the edges. Silver does that, but you can still read it if you hold it at the right angle. Steady as you go. Helen knew what she was talking about. I have had a lot of time to think about how things unfold. Not in a mystical sense. I am not a man who puts much stock in invisible forces handing out rewards and punishments, but I do believe, firmly and from experience, that the choices people make create the conditions they eventually have to live inside. Marcus and Serena made their choices carefully. They planned. They were patient, and the world they built out of those choices, built on forged paper and stolen signatures and a child used as a prop, eventually became a world that collapsed under its own weight. Not because the universe intervened, because that is simply what structures built on dishonesty do. They hold until they don't, and when they go all at once. What I want to say about ethics, about doing the right thing, is that it is not always comfortable. It is not always rewarded on a schedule you would have chosen. I sat in a correctional facility for 14 months while my son wore my name and spent my money, and told anyone who asked that I had simply lost my mind in my old age. Staying honest during that time did not feel noble. It felt like standing in a field with no shelter while the rain came down. But I stayed honest because the alternative was to become something I could not come back from. Once you start building your case on fabrication, you have joined the other side. And I was not willing to do that. Not for freedom. Not even for my companies. The intelligence part, the patience, the organizing, the legal pad full of details. That was not natural to me either, not in that context. I am a logistics man. I understand systems and routing and dependencies, but applying that to my own survival, inside a cell, while everything I had built was being quietly dismantled, that required a kind of mental discipline I did not know I had until I needed it. Frank gave me information. Patricia gave me a framework. But no one could do the actual thinking for me. No one could decide every single morning to keep going rather than give in to the particular despair that collects in small spaces. That was mine to do. And doing it day after day was the hardest work of my life. Harder than the first year of the logistics firm. Harder than the 2 years after Helen died. What I took out of that facility, besides my watch, was the understanding that resilience is not a feeling. You do not feel resilient. You feel tired and angry and sometimes hollow. Resilience is just a decision to keep placing one foot in front of the other, even when you cannot see the ground clearly. It is unglamorous and often lonely, and it does not announce itself. It just accumulates, quietly, until one morning you walk through a door and realize it carried you all the way through. I think about Lily. She is 9, and she is curious, and she trusts the world the way children do before the world gives them reason not to. My job now, the most important job I have left, is to be someone who reinforces that trust rather than complicates it. That is the thing Marcus and Serena could not touch, no matter what they forged. Some things are not in any paperwork.